منك مقصودي ومعتمدي.
فقهنا إذا جهلنا وزدنا علما نافعا وعملا متقبلا يا كريم. وبعد. In this session of marriage and family life, we will continue our discussion on the rights and obligations that are required of a husband towards the wife and the wife towards the husband. We began by looking at certain verses in the Quran, and we're taking this from the perspective of a verse in Surah An-Nisa, And just to give some context to Surah An-Nisa, Surah An-Nisa, particularly the first half of Surah An-Nisa, has a lot of verses that speaks about rights of women, which is why the surah is named An-Nisa, women. So there's a lot of discussion about rules around marriage. And in verses 34, 35, and I think 36, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us certain key instructions around the responsibilities of the man in his marriage and the responsibilities of the woman in her marriage. And when we look at these responsibilities and duties, particularly today, some of what we're going to mention there are some who may not like what we're going to mention. But as we mentioned in the last session, this is not about personal opinions. This is not about husband trying to impose his will upon the wife and the wife trying to impose her will upon the husband. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala regulates the lives of all human beings, and He gives you guidance in every part of your life. Every part of your life that has some importance and some significance, He's told you exactly how to do it. And the khair, the only good, is that if you bring your life in line with how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how He regulates it, and how the Prophet ﷺ, he showed you how to be. So the key verse about this issue in Surah An-Nisa is verse 34, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave responsibilities to the man. But He said, الرجال قوامون على النساء بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض وبما أنفقوا من أموالهم. Men are supporters of women, maintainers of women. And this idea of qawama, this idea of maintaining and supporting, as we shall see, it's not the idea of absolute dictatorial authority, because we are going to speak about the issue about obedience and disobedience, and that's a key aspect within marriage. That's not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave. He did not give the man or an authority where he behaves like a tyrant over his wife. That's not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the man. He gave the man the duty to take care of his wife. By what God has given one more than the other, and by what they provide from their property, from their wealth. So we began in the last session speaking about the first key responsibility of the husband towards the wife, which is that he has to take care of her financially. He has to take care of her financially. And we also mentioned that a woman should never have to work. She may choose to work, particularly if her husband is struggling, particularly if her husband, for some reason, is not able to take care. Even then, if she wants to play law and fiqh, she can still refuse and she can still demand from him. But at that point, if she does, that falls under وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى. That falls under Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala advising believers to help each other in righteousness and goodness, to cooperate with each other in righteousness and in goodness. For a man, when he takes care of his wife, it's the most blessed thing that he can do in terms of spending his wealth. And that obligation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made upon him, it's the best way that he can spend his wealth. You can, as a man, you can give sadaqah, you can give a lot of charity, and you may spend a lot in charity, but that food that you put on the table for you and your wife to eat is it's the best money that you spend. And the best here meaning the greatest reward that you'll receive. So when you're tiring yourself and you're working and alhamdulillah you're earning a lawful salary and income, and at the end of it, it goes out to pay your rent, and you're going shopping and buying the food and so on. That money that you're spending is the best, and it's the most rewarded money that you will ever spend. All of that sadaqah that you do after that will always be lesser in rank. When you spend on your children, that's the best money that you can ever spend with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you want to compare it, the nafil that you pray will never match the fard that you pray. Although nafil, the optional prayers that you do is about increasing, you still need to do your fard. You still need to fulfill your fard. If you prayed tahajjud all night long and never prayed fajr, your tahajjud was pointless. Your night prayer was pointless if you didn't pray fajr after praying tahajjud. If you're going out spending on all the fuqara and all the poor, but you're not taking care of your wife, you're not taking care of your children, then you're wasting your time spending on everybody else, because they are your first priority as legislated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon you. So when you do take care of your family, don't moan and groan about it. Don't moan and groan about it. Don't complain about it. Alhamdulillah, it's the best reward. It's the best reward that you can, it's the best wealth that you can spend. When we understand the ayah, it comes at the very beginning of the Quran, and it's repeated throughout the Quran. وَمِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ يُنْفِقُونَ. And they spend from what we've given them. That spending here, first and foremost, is your zakat and your nafaqah. It's your zakat, it's your obligatory requirement to pay zakat, as well as that you take care of your family. And if a man fails in that responsibility, we don't have an Islamic legal system, but this will be imposed upon him. He has no right to refuse that. It's not something that's optional for him. It's not something that's optional. He has no right to say that I don't feel I need to because you work and you earn an income and so on. He has no right to refuse. That's an obligation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed upon him. Some hadith in this context, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, a dinar that you spend in the path of God. If you want to convert it now to our money, say a pound that you spend in the path of God. A pound that you spend on a slave, to free a slave. A pound that you give in charity to a poor person, and the pound that you spend on your family. The Prophet ﷺ said, the one with the greatest reward is the one that you spend on your family. The one with the greatest reward is the one that you spend on your family. It is greater than somebody going out to fight for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All the money he spends, he goes to free a slave, he goes to spend on poor people. The best that he can ever spend is on his family. A hadith in Sahih Muslim. It's a sufficient sin for a man that he does not provide for the one for whom he is responsible. It's a sufficient sin for a man that he does not provide for the one for whom he is responsible. And when you know that there's a man who's behaving in that manner, then you should warn him of the consequence of that. And you should warn him of the consequence of that. That when the Prophet ﷺ says sufficient sin, that generally tends to mean if he never committed any other sin, then that's enough of a sin to earn the wrath of God. That's enough. If he never lied and backbited and consumed interest, he will still receive punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the crime that he's committed. It's a sufficient sin for a man. Another hadith. It's a sufficient sin for a man that he withholds from the one he is responsible for supporting. And in that context, the Prophet ﷺ actually instructed a companion, a sahabiyya, whose husband was not taking care of her and the children. He wasn't spending on them. He said, take what you need. Take what you need. Take what you need for yourself and your child. Meaning, you don't need to ask him for that. And it's not considered theft. It's not considered theft on your part. You're not considered to be stealing. He's withholding what you're entitled to as a wife and as a child. So the Prophet ﷺ actually instructed a sahabiya, a companion whose husband was not taking care of it, to take without asking. But as long as bil ma'ruf, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, ma yakfik, he said, what's enough for you and your child, just take it without his permission, and that's not theft. It's withholding from him. She's just claiming what she's entitled to have. We also mentioned last month, that's the general point, there's a lot of There's a lot of, and this is not the place to speak about it, but there's many adilla, many proofs to support the obligation of the husband having to take care of his wife, and that comes from Quran, it comes from Hadith, Ijma' al-Ummah, agreement of this Ummah, and so on. It's absolutely concrete, and there's no dispute on this issue, that the husband's first responsibility towards his wife is to take care of her. But then in that context, women should be careful. And we mentioned in the last session, those who are not married should look at the source of income of their husbands. They should look at the source of incomes of their husbands. If the husband is somebody who's acquiring money in a haram manner, then she should not consider marrying that person. She should not consider marrying that person. Because if his wealth is based on haram, then what she consumes is coming from that haram wealth. And she has no excuse because she had a choice. She had a choice. The Sahabiyat, the female companions, they would say to their husbands when they used to go out to work, be careful of where you acquire your wealth from. Be careful where you make your money from. Because we can bear patiently starvation, but we cannot bear patiently the fire of hell. But we cannot bear patiently the fire of hell. And whatever money you bring in that comes from haram sources, and your child eats it, and your wife eats it, and you eat it. The Prophet ﷺ, he said that any flesh that is nourished on suhat, on haram money, hellfire is its place. Any flesh that is nourished on haram money, hellfire is its place. So women should consider that carefully, and they should warn their husbands, because the woman should be nasiha. The woman should not remain silent when she sees her husband doing wrong. The woman should not remain silent when she sees her husband doing wrong. If he's falling into haram, because there's too much attraction to fall into haram now. You can make so much quick money by going into haram avenues. Well, if a woman sees that her husband, alhamdulillah, has halal income, but he's tempted to go down to haram, then she should warn him. And she should have nothing to do with that wealth. She should separate that from her, because it affects her deen just as much as his deen. It affects her religion just as much as it affects his religion. And remember, the key point in all of this is that what you consume affects what you put in, affects what you put out. It affects your worship. Whether Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts your worship or not depends upon what you consume. The food that you eat, make it tayyib. The Prophet ﷺ said, make your food, make what you consume tayyib, pure, wholesome, then your dua will be accepted. Then your dua will be accepted. So that's the first obligation upon the husband. The second obligation upon the husband, the responsibility of the husband towards the wife, is to guide and advise his wife in her religious obligations. To guide and advise his wife in her religious obligations. And we may even consider this to be more important than the first one. Because a woman may choose to overlook the first one. If the husband is struggling and she's going through difficulty and he's going through difficulty, but she's willing to bear patiently the difficulty, then that's a high maqam, that's a high rank that she has with Allah. She's sabira. She's patiently going through the fact that he's not able to provide for her. And she's satisfied with that. She has a high status with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But neither he nor she can be satisfied with the fact that she's not fulfilling her obligations to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he cannot remain silent if he sees his wife doing wrong. If she's in a state of ignorance, and she doesn't know her basic obligations in religion, he has to rectify that. It's his responsibility. He now has authority over her, and there's a religious responsibility, not just a financial responsibility. There's a religious responsibility. If he happened to make the mistake of marrying a woman, he's practicing his religion and she's not, and it's a mistake if he does that. But if he chooses to go down that path, he now has the responsibility of tarbiyah, of trying to help her along in her religious practice. And that's based on the ayah in the Quran, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu qu anfusakum wa ahlikum nara. O believers, protect yourself and your families from a fire, وَقُودُهَا النَّاسُ وَالْحِجَارَةُ, whose fuel is human beings and stones. A fuel or a fire that will burn stones. Based upon this ayah, based upon this verse, if you if you are negligent about the fact that your wife doesn't pray, that your wife doesn't fast in Ramadan, that your wife, she sits there and she's backbiting all the time, that she's committing haram all the time, and you either join in with her, or you slip with her, or you just turn a blind eye to that. The sin is hers, but you're responsible with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because you remain silent. And more so than whenever you see any wrong, you have some degree of responsibility. But that degree of responsibility depends upon whether you can do something or not about it. If you see Muslims committing haram, if there's some average people and you hope that they may accept your advice, then it's still good that you go and speak to them. But if it's your wife and your children, then it's fard upon you to speak and do something because you have authority at that point. That's the authority that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed upon you. That's qawwamuna ala nisa. That's that authority that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you over your wife. It's not about being a tyrant or a dictator. It's about you trying to raise yourself and raising those that are in your responsibility along with you. It's not just about money. You may all take care of your family and spend lavishly on your family, but they don't pray. They don't pray, they don't fast, they don't read Quran, they don't do any dhikr, they don't engage in worship. It would have been better you didn't spend anything on them and that they went through that patiently, but you ensure that they pray. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders you, وَأْمُرْ أَهْلَكَ بِالصَّلَاةِ وَاصْطَبِرْ عَلَيْهَا. Order your family to pray. Order your family to pray. This is an order to men. Order your family to pray and be patient with prayer. Sayyidina Umar, radiallahu anhu ardah, he would spend the night in worship. His wife is sleeping. He would spend the night in worship. When it comes to just before Fajr, he would stand there and wake her up. And he would recite that verse, وَأْمُرْ أَهْلَكَ بِالصَّلَاةِ وَاصْطَبِرْ عَلَيْهَا. Order your family to pray and be patient in prayer. Order your family to pray and be patient in prayer. So that's your responsibility with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala towards your wife. You must, this is not like high spirituality, this is just ensure that she's doing her obligations, but that means you're doing your obligations. Because you have no grounds to speak of you yourself, although you still should speak, but you have no, your position is a lot weaker if you yourself are not doing it. And you should not be this weak, lame husband who's like, my wife will get me up for Fajr, and my wife, she'll help me along in these things. That's a weak, lame husband who's shifting responsibility to the other side. Yes, she will help you, but you're the one who's answerable for her. You're the one who's answerable for her. You're the first one you're the first one that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask about. Why didn't you instruct your wife to pray Fajr? Why didn't you instruct your wife to do? Why did you instruct your wife when she was speaking ill of other people? Why didn't you instruct her to be quiet at that point? And why, even to the extent that perhaps it may need some harshness on some occasions, a harshness that's driven out of concern. When it's our own personal issues, we start shouting and getting angry just because something happened about you. But when it's with prayer, you smile, you sit there silently and don't say anything about it, and we're just okay with it. But there has to be a concern about the spiritual state of your wife. That's your responsibility, and your mas'ul, as the Prophet ﷺ told us in the hadith, every single person has a responsibility, and everybody will be questioned about his responsibility. And the husband will be questioned about his wife. And the husband will be questioned about his wife. The husband will be questioned about his wife. He didn't say the other way around. He didn't say the wife will be questioned about the husband will be questioned about the wife. So that involves that the husband must first and foremost be a teacher for his wife. He must be a teacher for his wife, because although what we've spoken there about prayer and other matters, the first thing is that if your wife is jahila about her deen, ignorant about her religion, it's your responsibility to address that. Like now what happens? Let's enroll her on a course. Let's take her to the Shaykh. Like why? Because you yourself are not bothered about it. Because I'm doing my thing, which is I'm working all day long and I'm putting food on the table, so it's not my responsibility. Both of those are your responsibility. So put food on your family's table is your responsibility. And to ensure that your wife knows her religion is your responsibility. And if it means that you need to bring somebody because you yourself are not able to. We're not talking here about high level knowledge. We're talking about just she knows how to pray. She knows how to read Quran. And you, as the husband, should be the first teacher of your wife. And your wife should be the first teacher of your children. The first teacher of your children should be your wife. One of the consequences of your wife being jahila, being ignorant, is that you'll produce children, she'll raise children who are ignorant. She'll raise children who are ignorant. If you are ignorant, then that will be the state of your wife, and then that will be the state of your children. So you are responsible. If because of where you are at that particular point, that you haven't enough to give, then two things should happen. It's not enough for you now to say to wife, you need to go and learn. Although that's something you will need to say. The first thing is that you will need to go and learn. You will need to go and learn. And the behavior of the companions, when they would go and they would return back home, first thing the wives would ask, what have you learnt new from the Prophet ﷺ? What is it that you've learnt new from the Prophet ﷺ? The first thing when you return back home, you've been to class, you should share it first with your wife. And this is what I've learned today. You should go back and you be that chain that connects her to knowledge. Because she has other responsibilities. She has children to take care of. She has the house to manage and so on. She may not be able to do what you do, but you should be feeding back everything that you're taking. Everything that you're taking, so that she does not remain in a state of jahil. You should not see that her role is just to take care of the house. You should not see that as, and for you just to make sure that she's got everything that she needs at home. That's not your primary role, and it's not her primary role. Your first role is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and her first role is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's the reason why you got married. And you're going to have children that you hope to be abideen salihin, righteous worshippers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but you're not doing anything to rectify it. You're expecting some miracle to happen, because you're not really doing much. You're keeping your wife in a state of ignorance, and then you expect these wonderful children to be raised from that household. You expect these wonderful... It will not happen unless you start feeding back everything that you're learning. Unless you start bringing that knowledge into your home. The first people that must be educated from what you've taken are those directly around you. Save yourself and your family from hellfire. And that's why this is some fiqh here. If you've not taught your wife fard ayn, obligatory knowledge, she's allowed to leave house without your permission. She's allowed to leave the house without your permission. If you've not taught her, if she doesn't know her basic obligations and you've not taught her that and you've not learned that yourself, she doesn't need to ask you if she's leaving the house. She doesn't need to ask you because you failed in your responsibility towards her. So if she's asking you, I want to learn how to read Quran, I want to learn how to pray, and I don't know how to do it, and you're not fulfilling that responsibility for her, or you're not bringing somebody who can teach her that, you're not providing any alternative, and she's entitled to go to the dance without asking you. And that's stated in the books of fiqh. That's stated in the books of fiqh. One of the cases where a woman is allowed to leave the home without taking permission of her husband is when she needs to learn fard ayn and he's not providing anything for her. So he must be a teacher and a guide for her. You must be a teacher for her. You must be a guide for her. You must always be inquiring about her. How much Quran have you read today? How much dhikr have you done today? How much salah have you prayed today? Beyond the fard. How much khair have you done today? How many times have you done astaghfirullah today? He should always be speaking to his wife about these matters. He should be speaking because that's what he'll be asked about with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A wife is not you just get married and she's there at home to take care of your needs at home. That's not what she's there for. You've been brought. That's one aspect in terms of your marriage. But she's been brought under you for you now. Her father should have taken her up to a point. Her father should have taken her up to a point in terms of religious guidance and obligation. Now it's your responsibility to carry on that. Now it's your response. If you as a father have taken care of your daughter in a proper manner, raised her, she's a believer in God and she's a worshipper, and then she marries a man who's similar in nature to that, then it will just continue her path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if the one that she marries is somebody who's not concerned about that, he now becomes a barrier in her journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in her trying to raise herself and get to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you must be a teacher for her. You must be the first source of knowledge for her. You must be a guide for her. You must always be inquiring about where she is, speaking to her about these matters, in terms of her deen, in terms of religion, in terms of understanding. He must ensure that she has learned and fulfills her religious obligations. He cannot be satisfied, and first of all, ideally should not marry a woman who's jahila. But that, if she's a woman who doesn't know her religion, really, ideally shouldn't. But if she has some concern for religion, that she wants to practice religion, but something that hasn't been given to her, then it's something that can be rectified. But now that you have married a woman who doesn't really know enough about her religion, you have the responsibility to ensure that that's taken care of. Following on from that, a responsibility of the husband, and this is more than the wife, although these are all points for the husband. The previous one, you could argue to an extent that the wife has a degree of responsibility. Like if she sees her husband not praying, she should speak about that. If she sees her husband doing wrong, she should speak about that to him. And if that marriage is a proper prophetic marriage, it's a prophetic household, and it's something we will speak about, the ideal household, the prophetic household, because everybody should try and model their homes on the home of the Messenger of God. See the relationship that the Prophet ﷺ had with his wives. And one thing you see, it was a very open relationship. It was a very open relationship. Like the Prophet ﷺ was not a tyrant towards his wives. He would speak to them. He would consult with them. He would take mashwara from them. He would take advice from them, even though he ﷺ never needed advice from any human being. But as is mentioned in hadith, there was nobody who took more advice from people than the Prophet ﷺ. There's nobody who took more advice, even though his Lord would have gave him guidance and everything. But he's teaching us that always ask those around you. Don't behave like a dictator and tyrant, because that was not the household of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the wife has some responsibility. If she sees that her husband is slipping up and he's done something that's wrong, she should advise her husband. She should not remain silent. She should advise her husband, and the husband should nurture that environment where she doesn't live in that state of fear of being told off. Right? He should be happy when she says that to him, and he should let her know. Right? He should be thankful to her that she's pointed out that he's done something wrong. He should be thankful to her that he's pointed out that he's done something wrong. He should not take, even though his initial reaction may be that, but that's ego, that's nafs. If your wife sees that you've done something wrong and you're reacting badly to that, there's element of nafs within that. It's not an element, that is nafs. That's not an element, that is your nafs that needs taming, that's your ego that needs taming. If your wife comes and tells you you've done something wrong, take it on board. Take it on board. But this next one, this is exclusively for the husband, or for not more of a greater responsibility on the husband, which is that it's a fard upon the husband to learn the legal requirements of marriage, which is what we're doing here. That's more of an issue for the husbands than the wives. Although both of them need to know their obligations, she needs to know what she's required to do within the marriage. And as we said at the beginning of this discussion, a person should not get married unless they know how to engage in marriage. Because anytime you engage in anything that Allah subhanahu will question you about, you best know how Allah subhanahu wants you to do it. Anything that He's going to question you about, and there's not much in your life that He's not going to question you about. There's not much but one of the most important parts of your lives that He is going to question you about is your relationship with your wife, and the wife's relationship with the husband. That's one of the most important relationships you will be questioned about. Right? He can overlook, if you slip in your worship, He can overlook that. He will forgive you. But if you wrong another person, He's not going to overlook it until that person is forgiven you. Until that person is forgiven you. So if you engage in that marriage and you're doing wrong towards each other, from the outset you're already in the wrong because you didn't know what was required of you. You didn't know what was required of you. But it's more of an issue of a husband because he's the one that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed with the greater authority in the marriage. He's the one that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given greater authority within the marriage. that although they both have responsibilities within the marriage, the husband is the one that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given the ultimate responsibility within the marriage. So he must know aspects about the marriage that are specifically related to him. And the key issue here, perhaps, is the issues around divorce. Around divorce. All issues around marriage, you should know, both of you should know. Especially how to behave towards each other. How to behave towards each other. What are the boundaries? Your husband and wife, use people are the people that you'll have most interaction with. There's nobody you can have more interaction with than husband and wife. So that's where you need to know how to behave more than anywhere else. And it's a lot easier to behave outside than inside. So that relationship, you need to know a lot more about that than any other relationship that there is. But that's both. But in terms of the legal requirements of marriage, the man must know the regulations that govern the marriage. He must know the rules of marriage and divorce. He must learn to control his anger, because he is the only one who can terminate that marriage, not her. And something that he says may break the marriage, nothing that she says will break the marriage. There's nothing that she says that will break the marriage. There are simple things that he says that can terminate the marriage. Simple little things. If he says to her, get out of my face, that's a potential termination of marriage. If he says that could be the marriage over, possibly that could be the marriage over, depending on his intention. If he says to go back to your family, go back to your parents, I don't want to see you anymore, that could be marriage over. There's a lot of statements that a man makes that potentially could terminate the marriage. There's nothing that she says that will terminate the marriage. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given the keys to, or the scissors to cut the bonds of marriage to the man only, not to the woman. To the man only, not to the woman. So a man in a fit of rage with his wife, he needs to know what he's saying, how it affects the marriage. She can keep on winding up. She can keep on going at him. Nothing's going to happen to the marriage. It's only when he speaks. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him the keys to close the marriage. So he needs to know. He needs to know what are the boundaries of marriage. He needs to know what terminates the marriage. And in the last session, we'll speak about that. We'll speak about marital breakdown. We'll get onto that discussion about what actually finishes off the marriage. But because marriage is a contract between two people, and a contract between two people is based upon what you say, not what you intend. First and foremost, it's based upon what you say, not what you intend. Likewise, finishing is based on what you say, not what you intend. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ, he said there are three things. If they said seriously and if they said in joke, they're the same. If you said it seriously and you said it jokingly, it's the same. He said nikah, talaq, and itaq. Marriage, divorce, and freeing a slave. The key here is the man. Even just to wind up his wife, just to have a laugh, he says, you're divorced. It's a divorce. It's a divorce. Because it's based on the statement, not on the intent. The point of mentioning all of this, although there's quite a lot of technical legal details around this, is that it's the man who needs to know this. And when you get married, now that you're entering into something that you alone can break, you need to know what's going to keep you in that marriage, what's going to break that marriage. I did a marriage with somebody a couple of months ago, phones up about a week ago, and I've said divorce 3 times, is the marriage over? Yeah, it's over. But I didn't know what he was saying. So you said 3 times, you knew what you were saying. Why didn't you say 1,000 times? Why didn't you say 1 time? You said 3 times, you knew what you were saying. You knew exactly what you were saying. But I didn't realize the consequence. It doesn't matter. It was your responsibility to know about these matters. These are legal statements. It's your responsibility. And you need to learn the consequence of, Allah has given you the authority. You need to learn the consequence of essentially the power that you have in your hands. You're the one, although this is not advisable, this may well fall into dhulm, into injustice. If she wants out of the marriage, she can't get out of the marriage unless you say so. But you can also finish off that marriage without you realizing what you're saying. It's ultimately with the husband. And so that's why the husband needs to know what he's saying. He needs to know what will terminate the marriage. So the easiest thing to do, just learn to control your anger. And if you are angry with your wife, don't say anything out of turn. Don't say anything that potentially could terminate or indicate that marriage is no longer going on. Because he alone has the authority to terminate the marriage. Everybody who gets married, in fact, I've got a copy of the book, everybody should get a hold. Let me just pull out this book. Everybody who's married or is about to get married should have this book. Initiating and Upholding an Islamic Marriage by Ustad Hidayah Hartford. Initiating and Upholding an Islamic Marriage by Hidayah Hartford. She gives it in simple language, but she also goes through that discussion about divorce, which is important for a man to know. I think she gives some of the legal aspects, but that's an absolute essential for a person to get married. I repeat it: Initiating and Upholding an Islamic Marriage by Ustad Hidayah Hartford. Initiating and Upholding an Islamic Marriage by Hidayah Hartford. Anybody who's married and doesn't know what they're doing in the marriage should get it. Anybody who's considering marriage should get it. And whenever you know somebody's getting married, this is a gift that you should give to you. Tell them, before you've got married, make sure you read the whole of this. It's an excellent book. It's written, and it's good for women as well, because most books come from a legal point of view, which can be quite upsetting for women sometimes, because most of the law is stacked on the side of the husband, but she gives it from a woman's perspective. She gives it from a woman's perspective, which kind of balances it out. So the husband, the man, that's his obligation upon him in his marriage. He must know the boundaries, what will keep the marriage going, what will terminate the marriage. Allahu Akbar. So they're the 3 points, 3 key points that we began with. There are more, and we'll come on to the first one, just to summarize the 3 points. The obligation of the husband: 1, to provide for her lawfully and not to expect her to provide. 2, guide and advise his wife in matters of her religion. And the 3rd, he must know the legal requirements of marriage. There's a more general point which we'll come on to when we speak about staying married. It's an obligation upon both how they behave towards each other, that they respect each other, that they behave with each other in a manner of tolerance, that they deal with each other in a loving, compassionate manner. But that's when we move on to looking at the prophetic example of marriage, because he somewhat personified that. He was the most perfect example. I'll give an example of that, and I think maybe next time we'll speak about this as well. This verse that speaks about how the husband should be, the obligation of the husband and the wife, it then continues on saying, وَاللَّاتِ تَخَافُونَ نُشُوزَهُنَّ فَعِظُوهُنَّ وَاهْجُرُوهُنَّ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ وَاضْرِبُوهُنَّ. And those women that you fear rebellion from, those women that you fear rebellion from, admonish them. That's what Allah says. Admonish them. Sleep separately within the same bed. I don't have any physical contact with them. And strike them. وَاضْرِبُوهُنَّ. And strike them, hit them. This ayah in the Quran causes a lot of problems for many people, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this ayah in the Quran allows for striking of the wife. And that's a discussion we'll have, perhaps in the next session. What did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mean by that? What's the limits of that, and so on. But the key thing to note, the Prophet ﷺ never once lifted his finger towards a woman or a child. Never once. Even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said it, he never once did it. He never once did it, because his marriage was not based on that relationship. His marriage was a marriage based on love and mercy and compassion. He never once criticized his wives for anything that they did out of line. He never once criticized anybody. And this is in Sayyidina Anas ibn Malik who mentioned this in relation to, he said, I served the Prophet ﷺ 10 years. And this is one of the most amazing statements that describes the khuluq of the Prophet ﷺ, the character of the Prophet ﷺ. I served him for 10 years. Not once in 10 years did he ever say, when he asked to do something and I didn't do it, why didn't you do it? Not once did he criticize. And when he said not to do something and I did it, why did you? Or when he asked me to do something and I didn't do it, why didn't you do it? Even when he tells them to do something and they didn't do it, he's still not going to turn against them. Why? بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ رَؤُوفٌ رَحِيمٌ. He's merciful and compassionate towards the believers. And the first people who should taste your mercy are those who are closest to you, not those who are furthest from you. The first people who should taste your mercy are those who are closest to you. And that's a real sign that you're a person who personifies Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So although in the Quran, people are going to come and say in the Quran it says you can strike your wife, and it says that, and we cannot deny anything in the Quran, it says that, we say there's the model for you. There's the model for you. He was married to Sayyidah Khadija all those years. All those years he never once struck his wife. And then, not just one, he had all of the other wives. It's hard enough with one wife, and when you got like 8 other wives with you, like for you not to go out of control at that point, that's a miracle of the Prophet ﷺ. That's a miracle. Like all the brothers are nodding their heads because they know full well, even with one wife, you're tempted so many times. You're tempted out. But the Prophet, with all of his wives, not once did he step out of turn. Not once, which shows you what? The nature of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And his way of mercy and of compassion and tolerance begins at home. So that's a fard that we should look at in our relationship, and that's something we'll speak about extensively. Because all we're speaking about here is law. Law doesn't, or obligation, that doesn't define how you should behave with each other. That's just setting the limits. And you have to do this whether you like it or not. You have to do it because your Lord has required you to do this. But now, as a human being, just behave yourself with each other. Just show decency. Just show common courtesy towards each other. Respect her. Tolerate her. She has shortcomings, so do you. You have a lot of shortcomings just as she has a lot of shortcomings. So just overlook the faults and help each other move along in your religion. So that's a key aspect in terms of dealing between husband and wife, and we'll come on to that. Now the issue of the wife. We mentioned 3 obligations of the husband. The issue of the wife. Osman, have some water, please. The verse in the Quran continues. فَالصَّالِحَاتُ قَانِتَاتٌ حَافِظَاتٌ لِلْغَيْبِ بِمَا حَفِظَ اللَّهُ. So righteous women are obedient, and what God would have them guard in their husband's absence. 2 descriptions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives for a righteous wife. 2 obligations. I didn't bring up this ayah, but there's another verse that speaks about the qualities of a righteous wife. It's in Surah Al-Tahrim. I'm just going to find, I'm not going to be able to bring it up. But in Surah Al-Tahrim, I think it's verse number 4 or 5. عسى ربه إن طلقكن أن يبدل أزواجه خيرا منكن مؤمنات مسلمات قانتات. I think it's verse number 4 or 5. It's not our discussion, but for a woman to see what it means to be a believing wife, refer to that surah. Refer to Surah Al-Tahrim, because this is slightly going off. But Surah Al-Tahrim is a surah about wives. It looks at the nature of wives. It speaks about the wives of the Prophet ﷺ. On a particular occasion when they spoke out of turn, or they did something that was out of turn with the Prophet ﷺ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he advised the Prophet ﷺ in terms of how to deal with them. And then he told them, this particularly about Sayyidah Aisha and Sayyidah Hafsa radiallahu anhuma, عسى ربه إن طلقكن أن يبدل أزواجه خيرا منكن. Perhaps your Lord, if he divorces you, if the Prophet divorces you, will replace you with better wives than you. And then it lists out the qualities of those wives. Better wives than you, and then it lists out the qualities of those wives. Surah Al-Tahrim is an important surah for women to read, because it speaks about wives in their relationship with their husbands. And the interesting thing, it ends with 2 opposite types of wives. Wives of prophets, where the wives were unbelievers. And wives, it speaks about the 2 prophets, Sayyidina Nuh and Sayyidina Lut alayhim as-salam. And it speaks about their wives who were unbelievers, who rejected their call. And then it speaks about the opposite. Speaking about Sayyidah Asiyah, one of the 4 perfect women. Who's married to one the worst tyrants that humanity has ever known, Fir'aun. And it speaks about the plight that she was in, the difficulty that she was going through, and the prayer that she made against her husband. The prayer that she made against her husband. So it speaks about the opposite extremes of wives. The opposite extremes of wives. So the two wives who were unbelievers married to prophets. And then that saintly woman, one of the four greatest women, who's married to the worst tyrant that has ever lived, Fir'aun. But then it ends by speaking about a woman who's not married, Sayyidah Maryam, the perfect woman, the one who's devoted completely to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's an interesting surah for women to read, Surah Al-Tahrim. But here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this verse, in Surah An-Nisa, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about two qualities that He requires of women, that they be obedient and guard what God would have them guard in their husband's absence. The first obligation of the wife, and we want to put this into context that men should not abuse this. Men should not abuse this, but the first obligation of the wife towards her husband is obedience to her husband, as stated in this ayah. الصالحات قانتات, obedience to the husband. The first obligation of the wife towards the husband is obedience to the husband. But obedience to the husband is conditional on two things. One is that he obeys Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One is that he obeys Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If he tries to get her to do things that are acts of rebellion against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is haram for her to obey. And a couple of people recently have mentioned, a couple of sisters recently saying that they're married and the husbands are telling them not to cover themselves, not to wear hijab, not to cover themselves. I know cases of husbands who swore an oath that you're divorced if you pray. You're divorced if you pray. That's the husband actually said, you're divorced if you pray. At that point, you have to disobey your husband. You have to disobey your husband at that point. Because of the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, there is no obedience to creation and disobedience to the Creator. There is no obedience to creation and obedience to there's no obedience to creation and disobedience to the Creator. If your husband is telling you to do something that's categorically haram, you cannot obey. She cannot obey the husband. But it has to be something that's categorically haram. It has to be something that's categorically haram. If it's not haram, like if he says to her, I don't want you to fast on a Monday, for example, he's not asking her to do something haram. But he says to her, I don't want you to fast on Ramadan, she must disobey him. She must disobey him. She must fast whether he likes it or not. So the first, she cannot obey him if he's asking her to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If he's asking her to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We understand this because this authority, the husband does not have inherent authority over the wife. It's only because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said it. It's only because Allah and this is now, like women particularly in the West, particularly women who are raised with standards that are not prophetic, they struggle with this idea. They struggle with the idea, like, why do I need to obey my husband? Why doesn't he obey me? He should be obeying me. If I have to obey him, he has to obey me. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't put it that way. That's human perspective. That's not the divine perspective. The divine, he put the authority with the husband. But if he set the authority, then it's on his terms. If he set the authority, then it's conditional that his authority is obeyed. That he's not giving you the authority so that you can teach her to rebel against God. He's giving you the authority so that you make her move in accordance with the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there can be no disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and obedience to the husband. And that extends to everybody. Parents, the same thing. Anybody. There can be no obedience to any human being if it involves disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another example of this, moving away from this, a legal issue about mahar, about dowry. Dowry belongs to the woman. It has nothing to do with the family. But often, sometimes what will happen with divorces is that will be taken back if a divorce takes place. If that was part of the dowry, That's theft, that's dhulm. And Allah subhanahu categorically stated in Surah An-Nisa, the surah that protects women, وَإِنْ أَرَدْتُمُ اسْتِبْدَالَ زَوْجٍ مَكَانَ زَوْجٍ وَآتَيْتُمْ إِحْدَاهُنَّ قِنْطَارًا فَلَا تَأْخُذُوا مِنْهُ شَيْئًا. If one of you decides to change wives, I divorce your wife and marry another wife, and you've given the first wife a mountain of gold as dowry, don't take anything back from it. Don't take anything back from it. So somebody then says, it's my parents, they said that it's got to come back. Your Lord has said it's not coming back. No further discussion. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said it's her wealth, it's got nothing to do with anybody else. At that point, doesn't matter what your parents are saying, doesn't matter what anybody says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has dictated something at that point. And nobody's word will override the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the same with the husband. The husband is to be obeyed if he obeys Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if he disobeys Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's not to be disrespected, but he's to be advised. And he's not to be obeyed. He's to be advised and he's to be told the wrong that he's doing, but he's not to be obeyed. And that's based on this ayah in the Quran, فَالصَّالِحَاتُ قَانِتَاتُ. Righteous women are obedient to their husbands. And there are many hadith that we're going to read about that. So even though this is an issue which many women will struggle with, and it's understandable that women will struggle with this issue because people generally don't like authority. People generally don't like authority. And that's why even when your parents tell you to do something, you always rebel. When your teacher tells you to do something, you always rebel. You always rebel. When anybody tells you to do something, there's always rebellion in there. It's the nature of the human being. Human being, by his nafs, needs to be tamed. His nafs needs to be tamed. But what should we recognize is that your nafs needs to be tamed, not that the authority is wrong. If you can't control your nafs, don't say you don't have any authority over me. If you don't like what your parents are saying to you all the time, and they're asking you to do things, don't say that you don't have any authority over me. Just accept that you're a bit out of control, and that you need your nafs taming. And likewise for the woman, if she struggles with this, and it is difficult, if she struggles with it, then she should accept that the struggles within her, particularly if her husband's being reasonable, which is what he should be. And he shouldn't be overbearing. He shouldn't be overbearing, he shouldn't be over-demanding. But even if he was, there's still an obligation upon her. Particularly where he's being decent and he's being fair about it and he's being respectful to her. Particularly in that case, then she needs to obey her husband. That's a struggle for women. But men should not abuse this responsibility. They should not be overbearing and unreasonable. He should not be overbearing and unreasonable towards his wife. He should try and take on board. He should try and take on board the views of his wife. The Prophet ﷺ would speak to his wives. He wouldn't just instruct, although because he's Nabi, any instruction he gives, we have to obey. But still, he would speak to speak to people in all aspects of life. He would speak. So a husband should try and take counsel from his wife and speak to his wife and understand and tolerate and respect and never disrespect his wife. But she must obey. Whatever way he behaves, she must obey. Because ultimately Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَالصَّالِحَاتُ قَانِتَاتُ. And to extend that, her obedience to her husband is over her obedience to her parents. Her obedience to her husband comes before her obedience to her parents. A woman who's not married, although the husband's obedience is still to his parents, not to his wife. The wife's obedience is to her husband. The husband's obedience remains to his parents. Up until the point that a woman is married, her father has the authority over her. Her father has the authority over her, and she must obey. Just as a man has to obey parents, likewise, a woman who's not married has to obey her parents. Again, as long as no haram is involved, no violation of rights, and there's nothing extreme in terms of what's being required. But once she marries, although she must always remain respectful to her parents, and she must always maintain family ties with her parents, and it would be wrong for the husband for him to cause her to break ties from her parents. That will be an injustice on his part. But her obedience comes then to her husband and not to her parents. Such that if there's a clash between the two, she is required to obey her husband and not her parents, but at the same time not disrespecting her parents. You can never disrespect your parents, whatever the situation is. You can never disrespect your parents, but the wife's obedience then is to her husband and not to her parents. Just to mention some hadith, and this shows that this is categorical. This is not about man trying to dominate women, and this is not about competing between husband and wife and so on. This is order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, order of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, any woman who dies leaving her husband content with her will enter paradise. Any woman who dies and her husband is happy with how she's been to him as a wife, that's a guarantee of paradise. That's a guarantee of paradise. As long as she's taking care of her husband, she's lived in a good manner with her husband, with all the problems that go on in marriage, but essentially he's happy. He's happy with her, the way that she's been all those 10, 15, 20 years. And when she dies, he's happy with her. That's a guarantee. That's a guarantee that she goes into Jannah. Just as we know, رِضَى اللَّهِ فِي رِضَى الْوَالِدَيْنِ, that the pleasure of Allah is in the pleasure of your parents. If your parents are happy with you, Allah is happy with you. But for the wife, if the husband is happy with her, Allah is happy with her. Because that's where Allah has placed the authority. That's the words of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. A woman who dies, leaving a husband content with her, will enter paradise. That's a hadith in the Tirmidhi. Second hadith. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, if a woman performs the 5 prayers, fasts Ramadan, does not commit adultery, and obeys her husband, she will be told, enter paradise by any door you wish. Enter paradise by any door you wish. If you look at that hadith, it's just saying that she needs to do her obligations and that's it. As long as she's not a woman who fasts a lot, she's not a woman who does a lot of dhikr, she's not a woman who does a lot of ibadah, but she ensures that her husband's happy with her, that she has a special rank with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and she obeys her husband. As long as he obeys Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, she's been given a guarantee of the highest maqam, the highest rank on the day, in any of the doors of paradise, she can enter paradise. And when you see such a level of reward, it tells the woman that there is difficulty involved in what's being asked. That's recognizing that anybody to have to constantly obey another person, it's difficult. It's difficult. So there's no doubt that there's difficulty in her having to obey her husband all the time. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving her the greatest of reward if she does so. Another hadith. A woman came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Lord of men and women. Allah has written jihad for men, He's required men to fight. Then if they are triumphant, they are rewarded, and if they are martyred, they are alive with their Lord who provides for them. What is equivalent to their deeds of obedience? And what does a woman get? What does a woman, they go out and fight. If they're killed, they have the greatest of reward. The shaheed, the martyr, has a unique rank with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the women are not required to go and fight. So what do they get that's equivalent? The Prophet ﷺ said, obeying your husbands, knowing their rights, and few of you women will do this. The equivalent for a woman is to obey the husband and know the rights that the husband has. And she will get the same as what the martyr on the battlefield will receive. She will get the same rank with Allah as what the martyr, the shaheed in battle. That woman there who's at home taking care of her husband, looking after her house and so on, raising children in the best of manner, and she's lived a life like that, she's equivalent in rank to the shaheed in battle. She gets the same rank as the martyr in battle. So her rank should not be considered low. That woman who maintains her house and takes care of her husband and children, that's not a low rank with Allah. That's a unique rank with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when a woman like doesn't like that and she prefers like to do other things, she prefers to go and study and she prefers to go and work and so on, she's missing out on a special maqam with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. She's missing out on a guaranteed path to paradise with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it's difficult, as the Prophet said, but few of you women will do this. But few of you women will do this. Just a note on this hadith. I've heard some women saying that the Sahabiyat, the women around the Prophet didn't used to speak that much and they were kind of overly submissive and so on. Far from the truth about the women around the Prophet. And when they read the Quran and see instruction coming down about, well, where's our portion? Where's our portion? They'll come and ask the Prophet, like one Salama, radiallahu anha, she came to the Prophet and said, Hijrah is all about the men in the Quran, where's our portion? And a verse was revealed down in response, فَاسْتَجَابَ لَهُمْ رَبُّهُمْ أَنِّي لَا أُضِيعُ. The last, I think verse 196 in Surah Ali Imran was revealed because she said, the Hijrah is only speaking about the men, where's the women? And then another companion, female companion, said, all of it's about the men, where's the women? Surah Al-Ahzab, I think verse 33 came down in response to that, saying the women are getting the same reward as the men will receive. So the idea that the women around the Prophet we're not like central to this is completely false. It's completely wrong. Here, a Sahabi is, in a sense, demanding, where's our reward? We don't go out and fight. Where's our reward? The Prophet told her, it's in being with her husband. Another hadith, a woman came to the Prophet ﷺ for something. The Prophet is going to discuss something else, but she had a personal issue that she needs to speak to the Prophet ﷺ about. After the Prophet ﷺ dealt with that issue, he then says to her, are you married? She says, yes. The Prophet ﷺ then asked her, how do you treat your husband? She replied, I do all that is in my capacity. I do all that's in my capacity. He ﷺ said, look at your relationship with him. He is your paradise, he is your hellfire. Look at your relationship with him. He is your paradise, he is your hellfire. If a woman is sabira, if a woman is patient with everything that her husband does, but she tolerates it, she's patient and she overlooks the fault of her husband and she'll keep on toiling just to take care of her husband and her children and so on, even though she doesn't like it, and even though others around her consider it to be menial, the type of what she's doing and so on. If she maintains patiently through that, then that's her paradise. But if she rebels and she speaks out of turn and she's disrespectful of her husband and she does not fulfill any of her duties and responsibilities, he's your hellfire. To the point where he's not happy with her. He's not happy with the way that she is. That becomes her hellfire. The Prophet ﷺ said an important statement for wives, look at your relationship with him, with your husband. He is your paradise, he is your hellfire. And how you are towards him determines how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be towards you. How you as a wife are towards your husband determines how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be towards you. So that's the second obligation that a woman, and the reason for mentioning those hadith, women generally now struggle with this idea. Struggle with the idea. But it has to be understood that obedience is first of Allah and His Messenger, and then after for the wife it's to the husband, as long as he does not require to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's her path to paradise. That's her spiritual journey. That obedient wife, you may not have done a lot of worship and study and education and so on, as long as her husband is happy with her, then she has a maqam with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's clear from what the Prophet ﷺ has said. The third that we mentioned, we're going to stop here because this is now, we're going to have a lengthy discussion about this, is in terms of marital relations between husband and wife. And that extends from what the ayah says, فَالصَّالِحَاتُ قَانِتَاتٌ. Qanitatun, those who are obedient to their husbands, obeys the husband's request for marital relations. We'll speak about that and go into some discussion about some of the ayat and the hadith speaking about relationship between husband and wife, intimate relationship between husband and wife, what the boundaries, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. We'll do that in our next session. We'll stop here today. And if there are any questions, we can open the floor for any questions. Are there any questions? Alhamdulillah. Any questions on this side? Yes. No, no, it's first to the wife. And the legal obligation towards his parents are only if they are poor and he is rich. But if they're comfortable, they have sufficient, then he has no obligation to it. It's still good to help them out, but not at the expense of his wife and children. So the first, wife and children, or particularly wife, that's unconditional. He always has to take care of his wife financially. Others, like parents, that's dependent upon their financial status and his financial status. But in terms of adab, the Prophet said, Anta wa maluka li abik. You and your wealth belong to your father. You and your wealth belong to your father, but not at the expense of the wife. If somebody's saying, I'm spending on my family, but you're not taking care of your wife, first is your wife. After that, you and your wealth belong to your parents. Belong to you. And that's an adab. Like if your parents need, or even don't need, and they're asking, you shouldn't refuse them. But importantly, not at the expense of your wife, because that's an obligation, unconditional obligation. Allah. We'll get into that discussion in the next session because there's a key issue and it's becoming a real social problem amongst Muslims in terms of when a woman gets married, she's not obliged to have to live and take care of her in-laws. But what's now happening is nobody's taking care of the parents. So it's the issue of how you balance that out. There's no obligation for the woman to live with her in-laws and take care of her in-laws. That's not her response. That's his responsibility. But now what's happening is nobody's taking care of the parents, and then you get the unfortunate situation where they're old and they're alone, and they may even go into nursing homes, that's a shame against the Muslim community. So it's about how you balance that. But the intention was to discuss that because that's becoming a social crisis amongst Muslims. How to balance the two out. Allah. Yeah. So be it. Even if she does it, she doesn't want to do, but she does it. Even then, it's still he still needs to go to that point. It's similar to a qadi in a Muslim state. He's going to force people to pray whether they like it or not. Because in a Muslim state, if somebody refuses to pray for no valid reason, he's in prison and he's beaten until he prays again. Whether he wants to pray or not, is just outwardly just some manifestation of prayer. So the same, the husband has to impose it upon his wife. Even some of the fuqaha said this is grounds to strike his wife. That's grounds to strike his wife if she refuses to pray. But we'll get into the discussion of striking. Some of the jurists they mentioned, we'll get into that discussion because that the limits and the boundaries. But that's one of the cases where they mentioned he's allowed to. There should be some discipline there. He should impose it upon her because he's questionable for that with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's one of his main obligations in terms of why he married, is to ensure that she fulfills her obligations with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah? In fiqh, so the question was that in terms of taking care of your wife, the way that people normally do is sufficient. That's sufficient. Like, you earn your income, and either you or her goes and does the shopping, and as a family you eat together, you live together, and so on. That's how a normal family would operate. Which in that case means that you're not required to give her a set amount, because her needs, shelter's taken care of, she's living in a house, clothes, food, everything's taken care of. So you're providing more than sufficient. But the original obligations, you hand over an amount to her. You hand over an amount to her, an amount that's determined and set. But that would only really be required if there's some type of dispute between them. Like if he's falling short, if he's not taking care of her properly, then an authority, it could be by some agreements, it could be through some mediation, it could be in a Muslim state a judge. If he's falling short, then an amount would have to be determined. How much does he have to give her so that she's able to provide for herself? Because he's not willing to buy it for her, and she's not being given access. And an amount will be worked out based on urf. There's some details about how that's worked, and he has to give her that amount. He has to give her that amount. But that's only when there's a breakdown in the marriage. That's an extreme case, because the normal way that marriages function, everybody buys for themselves as a family. It's bought for the family, and that's more than sufficient. Anybody else? There was a point which slipped my mind, and I did want to bring it up because it's a real problem in families, which is extended in-laws. And this was a discussion around. This is just going back. I just want to quickly mention this. We may come back to this because we will have a discussion around the relationship between husband and wife and in-laws and extended family, the relationship between them. But when we spoke about guide and advise his wife in her religious obligations, one of the places where within Muslim cultures there's a real failing is knowing the boundaries between mahram and ghayr mahram. Knowing the boundaries between who's mahram and who's ghayr mahram. And this is one of the cases where culture will always override religion. And we religiously will pray and read Quran and so on, but when it comes to certain family matters, no. Keep religion in the mosque. At that point, keep religion in the mosque. The Prophet ﷺ said, Al-hamu maut. In-laws are death. In-laws are death. In-laws are death. And the in-laws being death here is in relation to those who are ghayr mahram, having that relationship as though she's your own sister. And in terms of respect, she is. But you must understand your sister-in-law is not your sister. Your sister-in-law is not your sister. She's ghayr mahram to you. She's ghayr mahram to you. She's not like your mother-in-law. Mother-in-law is mahram permanently. You can be alone with your mother-in-law. You can travel with your mother-in-law. Even if the marriage is over, you're still mahram. Mother-in-law is mahram. Sister-in-law is not. First cousin is definitely a no. First cousin is definitely a no. Because you usually end up marrying your first cousins. Tells you clearly not mahram. They're clearly ghayr mahram. But that's one of the points where a husband should insist on these matters. You want to have a functioning Muslim household, and certain limits should be in place. Certain limits. These things, you're not going to have like an overhaul overnight on these things, but these things should be brought, and there should be some attempt to make changes. If a person's living in a family structure where it's difficult, he should. فَإِن لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِقَلْبِهِ وَذَلِكَ أَضْعَفُ الْإِيمَانِ. If you can't do anything about it, at least you should know in your heart that what's going on is wrong. Don't ever accept it that it's just the way it is, family and so on, because ultimately you've gone against the Messenger on this one. So you should understand that as a husband, you have some responsibility with that. You have some responsibilities for certain to try and ensure that they maintain the boundaries of Allah subhanahu. And this is one of the boundaries of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that your sister-in-law is not your mahram. Your cousin is not your mahram. You can't be alone with them. You can't treat her like your own sister. You may respect her like that, but you cannot treat, because she's family, but you cannot treat her in that manner. You can't be alone with her. You can't touch her, like the common thing about touching on the head when you come and see a family member. You can't do that if they're ghayr mahram. Doesn't matter what your culture says, and it's common in culture. You cannot do that, because Allah spent the Messenger forbade that, and you as a husband have a responsibility to ensure that your wife doesn't transgress the boundaries of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Bring deen into your homes in a comprehensive manner. Don't just be selective in what you like in this religion. Be comprehensive in terms of what you take on board with your religion. Allahu a'lam. We may come back onto that discussion when we speak about in-laws. Any other questions? Yeah, they're mahram. Yeah.
Even if they, the new couple have children,
Doesn't make a difference. They're mahram. As long as the marriage got consummated, then they're mahram. Stepchildren, they're mahram.
they're better.
Do you mean to each other? Or
So there's a girl from the husband's side, he brings a daughter in and she brings a son in. Then they have their own children. But what happens with them two that come from
okay. Sorry, that's not what I answered. I was speaking about husband and wife towards their stepchildren. They're mahram. I'm not sure on that. Let me check on that. I don't know the answer to that.
What I've heard is that once they have children from each other, then it can like blood bonds. Otherwise, it's if you could check.
Yeah, inshallah. Let me check that. Sorry.
After you get married, if you get married in the family, your aunt becomes your mother-in-law. What would be your?
Sorry, who become your?
If your aunt is your mother-in-law now,
Yeah.
how does your relationship change?
With who? With the?
With your aunt, what
Yeah.
would be your duties towards her? Would it be that of a mother-in-law or still of an aunt?
Well, you have both now. You have both because she's auntie, so you have family on the basis that she's family, and you have to treat her like your mother because she is. So in a sense, there now you have to deal with her as a mother from two perspectives now, because the Prophet said that your auntie is your mother, and you deal with her like your mother, and now your mother-in-law likewise should be dealt with in a similar manner. So on both grounds. So in a sense, it's not going to be a real change if you're treating your auntie like your mother. Then it'll be the same. You just continue. You continue in the same manner. Allahu Akbar. Yes. So what advice to parents? Yeah. No. Parents should encourage that marriage. If they're at university and you can't take care of her. The parents should try and create a situation where he's able to take care of her. So in a sense, the father is supporting his son and his daughter-in-law, because marriages need to be encouraged at a young age, particularly those going into university where there's more fitna than in other places. So the advice to parents would be not to say not to get married, encourage them to get married, and help them out. To if they between them can be married but in a sense not living as a couple, and that's as long as the aqd is taken, as long as they're lawful for each other, and in a sense like he's still living as a student, she's living as a student, but whenever they need to meet up, they can meet up. But if they want to live together as a couple, then it's something that the parents should be encouraged. Should be encouraged to try and help them with that. Right? Parents should try and encourage their children to get married as soon as possible rather than later, because after university, haram's already taken place more often than not. So to protect that haram taking place, parents, any sons or daughters who commit zina, the parents have a share in that. The parents have a share in that. Any sons or daughters who commit zina, when the parents were able to help them to get married and they didn't do so, the parents have a share in the blame. Wallahu a'lam. We'll finish with that and we'll continue in our next session. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.